it's a very early morning start on albeit a bit of a grey English summer's day, but I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Dr Vikki Barnes to Ideas in Love, Life and Leadership. Good morning, Vikki. How are you?
Good morning. I am really well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. I'm good. As I say, absolutely delighted that we've got this opportunity to talk this morning. We've, just to set some context, Vikki and I connected on LinkedIn, I think probably about 2 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer. And I can't remember what the attraction was. Something you'd posted obviously caught my eye, and we kind of started having a bit of a conversation, and we jumped on a phone call, and we've kind of kept in touch loosely over the last couple of years. And I'm hugely inspired by the work that you do, and for anyone who follows me on social media, one of my favorite quotes, and I do love a quote, is one that I stole from Vikki with permission, about how vulnerability is a strength, essentially, whereas some people see it as a weakness, and that's something that you explore a lot in your fabulous book, which is kind of why we're here talking today. So you published this book, Free Happiness, this year, just recently.
Yeah, about a month ago, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to say I was the first person that bought it and read it, but I don't think I quite got that. But an early reader, an early adopter. Yeah. And I read it in one sitting, literally one sitting, on one of the hottest days of the year, sat out in my garden with my feet in the paddling pool, sunbathing, and literally just read it cover to cover. So yeah, fabulous book, which we're going to come back to in a little bit, but I don't want to do all the talking this morning. So Vikki, I'd love you to tell everyone a little bit about you and what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, first of all, yes, you were one of the early adopters of my book, and I was so grateful. And I loved that picture of you that you took of the book and the paddling pool, and it just looked so idyllic. So thank you. It's one of my favourites. So I am a clinical psychologist by profession. I've worked for many years in the NHS, and then I did a good few years with Virgin as well. So when I did that job, I kind of switched from doing the face-to-face therapeutic patient-facing work in the NHS to more of a workplace well-being role, really. And I'd always been really interested in positive psychology, so that was always my bag, my passion. So I went from bringing that from therapeutic sessions to bringing it into the workplace and into this national position with Virgin. And then just over 2 years ago, I founded Positive Wellbeing, which is my business, which is all about bringing positive psychology and happiness into the workforce. So putting people first, basically, so that we can have successful organizations around the world.
Yeah, amazing. And of course, there is a wave at the moment of people realizing how important, and it sounds so obvious when we say it, but how important people are in that success of all these amazing companies all around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people do come first. That's not just something that I say. It's really important. Traditionally, we've got this view that we need to look after the money and the processes and the targets, and all of that matters, of course. But if you don't look after your people first, then that all falls apart, because people are the power behind all of this stuff. And when your people are happy and motivated and morale is good and there's lots of teamwork and a positive culture, then all of that other stuff falls into place much more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in the book, you share quite a lot of stories about your time with Virgin, and what you did there, and some amazing accolades from your colleagues and Mr. Branson himself, who writes something in the book as well, doesn't he? Which is just amazing. And as with so many things, he was obviously ahead of his time in terms of recognizing how important that well-being and people were in the organization.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of his, and I was anyway, so I was a little bit starstruck to meet him, but he quickly dissolved all of that, because he's just a really nice guy, and he made me feel very normal, made it feel very level. And I thought, what a great leader. Like, this is leadership, this human element. He wanted to know all about me and my life and my family and relationships, and just talk about normal stuff. We went on I remember one day we had this 3-hour hike. I think it might have been longer than that, actually, but we were on a big hike, and there were just 3 of us, Richard, myself, and another lady who works for Virgin Limited Edition out on Necker Island. And we just went for this big hike, and he said, let's just tell each other our most embarrassing stories. I thought this is going to be one of my favourite moments ever. It was definitely a career highlight for me, for sure.
Yeah, amazing. And you talk about humanness in the book again, and certainly I think, you know, you've tied the two together there with humanness and leadership. And I think, again, that is something that we're seeing a real shift in at the moment, with leaders recognizing that they need to bring that vulnerability that we talked about earlier and that humanness into their leadership. Whereas perhaps, you know, an older style of leadership tends to be, we need to keep that, you know, away from it. It needs to be separate. We need to have this sort of distinction between who we are and what we're doing in business, how we lead in business.
Yeah, I think that, like, as you alluded to before, people think that vulnerability is a weakness. And it's actually not. You know, vulnerability is putting yourself out there. Vulnerability is about exposure, for sure, but it doesn't lead to weakness. Sometimes it will lead to failure, sometimes it will lead to success, but everything leads to one of those two things, or somewhere in the middle. If you are showing or expressing vulnerability, all you're doing is being authentic. When I wrote the book, I found it really hard to separate those two chapters. I've got authenticity as a chapter and vulnerability, as you know. And I found it really hard to separate the two, because for me, they're kind of really aligned. They come hand in hand, but that's just me. I think they're slightly separate concepts. But I think that if you're being true to yourself and you're being a real human being, then you have vulnerabilities. Now, how much you express those is up to you, of course. Nobody's forcing anybody to express vulnerability. But what I'm finding time and time again is those leaders who do express an element of vulnerability and honesty about what they might be struggling with, or what isn't their best skill, or what they feel is something that really makes them feel a little bit nervous, or I don't know, something that isn't something that a leader would normally express, then people respond to that because it's human. People like it. People feel like they're on a level and they can connect. And connection is such a hugely important thing too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, as you said there, it's so many leaders that I speak to, and obviously I spend quite a lot of my time talking to people in leadership roles, and my view is that we're all leaders. We're all leaders of our own lives. So whatever our job title is, there is an element of leadership in everything that we do. But a lot of people who have more traditional leadership roles, you know, one of the things that they struggle with is being able to connect with people honestly from where they're at, because they are expected, or they feel that they're expected to be seen as knowing everything, to having it all together, to not being vulnerable, and to some extent not being authentic, you know, because they're trying to be something that they're not from a human perspective. So I think the more we can break those ideas down, the more we can explore them, whether people are, you know, associate with vulnerability or authenticity, or, you know, see them to be very close together. It's actually bringing some awareness to them, which, you know, is what you do so beautifully in this book. And I think the other thing that I really loved about the book, and it says it on the cover, which, you know, don't judge a book by your cover, but this book, judge it by its cover, okay? But also it kind of says everything that needs to be said, I think, on the cover. So, you know, it says free happiness, get one life, let it be happy, because we only have one life as we are here, right? You know, there are obviously beliefs around us having multiple lives in different ways, but the one we're living right now, there's only one of those. But also the other bit I love is the art and science of positivity, because I think, you know, obviously from your background as well and all that experience you bring with it, there's this power in being able to bring together that creative art of happiness and some real science behind it, because we still are, as humans, we like some certainty, we like to know, we like there to be some facts behind what we're doing. And I think the way that you've brought those two together is really, really powerful for people.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. That's so lovely to hear. That was my aim, really. What I wanted was to bring together all of this science, which I love. I'm a proper brain geek. You know, I've done this neuropsychology masters and obviously did the clinical psychology course, and it's all science. Positive psychology is a science, and psychology is the science of human behavior, and positive psychology is the science of living a good life. And I want to talk about the science of happiness. So it's all evidence-based. There's lots of research out there, global research. You know, people are doing more and more in this area. But at the same time, I didn't want to write an academic book. I didn't want to write something that was only for certain people in society, because everybody needs this. This is for everyone. I wanted to write a really accessible, almost like a coffee table gifty type book, but something that really had a strong essence and a strong foundation to it, but something that could give you a toolkit so that you can pick up and have some really evidence-based practices that you can take away in your life, but isn't difficult to get your head around and difficult to read and put into practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what you've achieved, because as I say, I sat and read it in one sitting, in one day. And as I was reading it, that's what I was seeing, was that idea of, you know, the little tools that you could go back in and that you could, you know, pick up and use. And it's like you say, it's one of those books I think will stay handy. I have a big pile of books on my desk always. And it's one of those ones. And if you have that moment, because as you say, life does happen. It's not always all, you know, shining light and happiness and positivity. You know, sometimes life can be really hard, and you share, you know, vulnerably a lot of stories in there about where life's been hard for you in many different ways. And I think something like this, where it's almost like, you know, if it is one of those days or hours or moments that you could just pick this up and almost flick through to a page and go, okay, I can use this. I can, this helps today. So if that's what you were looking to achieve, I believe you have.
Bless you.
So listen, when I was as we were talking earlier and sort of getting ready for the recording, I shared with you that when I read the book, you know, I love a book that feels like it's been read. So I'll mark pages, I'll get my highlighter out, I'll circle things, I'll make notes, because to me that's what brings books to life for me. So this morning I was sort of flicking through and looking at some of the notes and the pages that I've marked, and one really jumped out of me, and I just wanted to share a little snippet from the book, if that's okay with you. And then perhaps from that, you know, we can explore a little bit more about what you were trying to bring to life for people in that. And it was under the chapter enjoyment. And it was called A Joyful Spirit. So I'm just going to read this little section. So joy, by definition, is a feeling of great pleasure and happiness. The American author Elizabeth Gilbert, who is also a big hero of mine, encapsulates the joyful spirit of adventure and writes about how we can each invite more joy into our lives by waking up the creative spirit that lies within us all. She believes that we internalize negative feedback from our younger days. Perhaps the words of a school teacher who gave us a harsh grade for our best artwork, then believe right through our adult years that we aren't capable of creating new and wonderful things. We have a sense that we are simply not creative types, or that we don't have a good imagination. This is simply not the case. Humans are born with an immense amount of imagination and creativity, which bubbles up in all that we do during infancy, that pastime we call play. This doesn't go away, we just repress it because we compare ourselves with others and believe we're not good enough. That's where the mistake lies, in that negative belief. It's skewed, as many of our beliefs are. There is so much joy to be found when we dare to open up the boundaries we place on our imagination and let it loose. Love that. Love that.
That's the first time somebody's read a part of my book back to me. That was quite an experience. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. It's that I mean, there was so much in the book, but that little bit, and when I read it again this morning, you know, creativity is a huge part of what I do as well. And that belief in there is something that I believed for many years. You know, I'm not creative. And it's really in the last few years that I've been exploring that and saying, actually, I am creative. And these are all the places that I can be creative, letting those boundaries down and letting it loose and playing with it again, which is something that I love to do. So, but tell me about the experience of hearing it then. What did that mean for you?
That was a really amazing experience, actually. I was thinking, crap, did I write
that? You did.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I must have done. Yeah, it was a really weird experience. As the book's only been out for a month, that's the first time that's happened to me. Maybe it'll happen again. That was really nice. It's funny. I think that experience was a bit like when somebody reflects back to you how you come across to them as a person, or somebody reflects back to you what you've just said to them in their words, and then you almost get this mirror held up of yourself or how you're coming across. So it was a bit like that, but in the most beautiful way, because I was looking at your face and you were just looking like you were really taking it in, and it was really resonating with you. And that for me is the most magical thing, Rebecca, because I didn't write all of this just just for me. You know, this was, I wrote it to hit people like that in a really lovely place, and to have positivity come from it, or some kind of feeling that is good, whether it's happiness or joy or yes, I can do this. But I wanted it to be inspiring, and when I was watching you read it then, you looked like you were inspired. I don't know, maybe you were, maybe you weren't. I hope you were, and that's why you picked that part of the book out. And that for me is selfish, really. You know, that's a wonderful thing for me, right, to feel like I'm being that for somebody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you saw, if that's what you saw, is true. You know, that's kind of how I read books, whether I'm reading them out loud or whether I'm reading them to myself. I get that kind of tingly, excited feeling about them, and certainly that passage, you know, was, yeah, it has that effect on me. I was talking to another friend yesterday, and we were talking about living in the moment, as you know, you talk about in the book as well. And she's, you know, she said, just, you're telling me about it, but just pause for a minute and just let that joy just wash over you, because we don't often, you know, we get caught up in everyday life, and a bit like you said, you've written this book for others to share, but part of writing this book is for you to, you know, for you to find your happiness in being able to share that experience with other people, and to stop and enjoy that yourself while all of this is around you is really important.
That's why I need to celebrate with a proper book launch party. But you're absolutely right. You know, we need to stop and realize the great things that we're doing, because we're all doing wonderful things. And because of the way that life is at the moment, and our culture is very fast paced, and it's all about speed and getting there quickly, social media has kind of helped to drive that. Whilst it's an amazing thing, because we can get stories like this out there and conversations like this out there to people really easily, it also means that we're used to having things instantly, and we've become a bit of an instant culture. So I think quite often we need to remember to just pause and look at what we're doing and where we are. You know, if you're halfway up a mountain, stop and look at the view. That's the analogy. If you're one step up the mountain, look at where you're going and the excitement of getting there, but then look back at the step that you've just taken, because you've just taken a step, and that's a step in the right direction. I don't think we have to be at the top of the mountain to stop and take a look. We can do that every step of the way. But certainly when you're at the top of that mountain and you've achieved something that's really important to you, yeah, right, have a celebration around it. And that enjoyment section for me as well was also about, I think there was a bit in there that you read about comparing yourself to others, and we do that a lot. We're really good, us humans, at comparing ourselves to people who we think are better off than us, because a lot of people are going to be better off than us in different ways. But if we stop to think about what we do have, and this is all related to gratitude and thankfulness as well, and stop to think about people who are maybe worse off, or things that we have that others don't have, those comparisons, they all balance themselves out then, and we can be really grateful for what we have. And at the end of the day, the enjoyment chapter was about, if we're enjoying our own lives, or a part of it, or just the one thing we're doing right now, then you are the enviable one, right? If we're enjoying this conversation, we are the ones to envy. The people that are listening, if they're enjoying listening to it, or enjoying sitting by their paddling pool whilst they're doing so, they're the ones to envy, right? So envy isn't something that we should put out to other people. Envy is something that we can kind of think, well, maybe people can be envious of me because I have this great thing. You know, it's envy doesn't have to be this negative emotion. It can be something that we can use to help to realize what we can appreciate about our own lives.
Yeah. And also in my coaching, one of the things we talk about is how envy is also a useful tool when it is outward looking as well, because normally when we see something in someone else that we kind of envy, that's a pointer to something that we desire, right? Or something that we want, and it doesn't have to be negative. It can be inspiring. But I love how you know, also, look at me, look at what I've got. And you know, going back to that day, you know, enjoying that moment, you know, it literally was, you know, my kids' paddling pool blown up in my very messy, weedy garden, right, in a chair that wasn't some luxurious sun lounger. It was just a kind of chair I'd pulled out from, I think it's one of those fold-up ones, you know, the ones you take when you go on the beach, and that one of those little, you know, I just opened that up in my garden and stuck my feet in my paddling pool and read a great book. You know, so people might look at that picture and have this idea of this, you know, what's going on around that, and envy it, but actually it was a really simple moment, right? You know, and the kids weren't in the paddling pool, which made it a little bit quieter. Although it's a bit harder to concentrate. What would you like to share from the book that sort of, you know, I've picked something that for me, I mean, obviously it's all yours, but is there anything in particular you'd like to share from the book today?
Crikey. One thing I wouldn't know what to pick up on. I think there's an overall message from the book, which is, and it's on the back because it's so important to me, which is, you know, it's not about being perfect, it's about being authentic. And I really wanted to get that in there as a message for people who pick up the book and want to know what it's about. Because positive psychology, even though it sounds like it's about being happy and smiley and joyous all the time, it really isn't. It's about to me anyway, my take on it is that it's about accepting whatever is. And it isn't about living this perfect life that everybody would envy all of. It's about living your best life that you could envy if you were looking at yourself. So it's about being truly you, no matter what you are, who you are, where you are, what you're going through. So we're all going to be hit by things that we don't want in life. We're going to be completely blindsided by things. I certainly have been a few times, and that's going to happen, right? So ideally we want to be ourselves through it, and it's not just about be your best self. It's not always that straightforward. So sometimes it's mope, wallow, be sad, be angry, be all of those things, but know that you've got the resources and the tools to be happy again. So be hopeful in that optimism to come. And if you are feeling any feeling at all, be it, do it, express it in the way that you know works for you, but also know that you've got that resilience and the strategies to come back to or to move into. Take those tiny steps. It's all about doing what works for you. So it's being the genuine individual that you are, but seeing the wonderfulness in that. Every human is amazing in lots of ways, and it's seeing that and it's living that and it's being completely true to yourself. And one thing that I was doing whilst I was writing this book, because it's a scary process, especially the personal stories, as you mentioned, is I was thinking, be your best friend, Vic, stand by yourself here, stick up for yourself, and you're okay to do this. This is your story. You know, people, maybe somebody will want to read this, maybe somebody will benefit from hearing that you've been through something similar to what they've been through too. And I thought at the end of the day, even if it was just my friends and family who bought it, then hey, it was an achievement nonetheless.
And creating something and putting it out there in the world is the achievement, right? The who reads it and the people it touches and the ripple it creates in the world is amazing. But really, actually, you know, as you say, actually putting it, you know, being your own best friend, standing by yourself and creating it is the really amazing achievement. And I love the way that you share so vulnerably many of your stories. And I know, you know, personally, I reached out to you and said there was so much of the personal story that really resonated with me. And I think there are a number of different stories in there. And that's one of the things that I think brings these books to life, is when, again, you're modeling what you talk about, which is, look, I can be vulnerable, I can share, I can be honest, I can be truthful. And that really brings it to life, I think. So thank you so much for sharing so much of you in the book as well as all the amazing tools. And it was something that I was exploring with my coach the other day about being vulnerable. And they called me on not sharing with them where I was really at the time, you know, and kind of, you know, hiding myself away a little bit because I wasn't okay. You know, there's some stuff going on in my life, and they kind of called me on it. And then later on in the day, I mean, I'm part of this amazing coaching school, and later on in the day, we were working through some exercises about, you know, what we admire in other people. And one of the things that I realized that I really admire, admire, I think admire is a better word for in this case, in other people. And a lot of the people that I've invited on here to talk about their work, their books, etc., and this, you know, applies to you as well, is that vulnerability that they share, that not being okayness that they bring to their work. And it suddenly was one of those, I call it a heart thump moment, where I kind of realized that where I was keeping that to myself and not sharing it with others, because I think partly the role I do, you know, I coach other people and I'm there for other people, was that seemed really, really scary to share. And yet it was the very one thing that I admired about people that I go to for my inspiration, and that I look up to, and admire, envy, whatever word you want to use. And that was a real moment for me, actually, to realise that. So
I completely get that. I really, really do. And don't get me wrong, I talk about difficulties, and there are some stories in that book. There's obviously a heck of a lot more to those stories than are written on those pages, right? So I've shared so much, but it's really scary to even share that. So, and maybe I'll talk more about some of those stories, and I'm happy to do that. And over time, who knows what else happens in life. But for me, when things, I'm a huge advocate of sharing and talking and being vulnerable and expressing this stuff. But even I find it difficult in the moment when I'm struggling to talk about the struggles. So what tends to happen with me is I'll just kind of try and sort myself out or go a bit quiet, and then the people who really know me in that moment will check in and say, "You're not okay, are you?" Or "Are you sure you're okay?" Or "Let's just talk a bit." Because I'm very good at opening up and talking about things when I've kind of just come out of the pit a little bit, even if it's just a tiny bit, but I can see the light again. So I'm not perfect at this stuff, but the aim isn't to be perfect. Remember, it's to be authentic. So if authenticity to me is to go inside a little bit for a few days because I'm struggling, and then I know that I'll come out after that, and I will reach out to a friend or a family member, or I will let somebody in if they come to me and they recognize that's what's going on. That might be authenticity. It doesn't have to be shout it from the rooftops every moment you're struggling, you know, because I don't necessarily do that. So I completely get that there, Rebecca, that it's not always so straightforward to just be vulnerable in the moment. I'm better at showing my vulnerability maybe either side of the actual spiky bit that it's happening, you know, because that's really hard actually. So I do recognize that it's not always easy, and that's okay too. That's okay. Just recognizing that is enough, and knowing that you'll express it in the way that is most authentic to you and easiest for you, because that's the best way to start. It's about practice. It's all these are just skills that we need to practice, and I'm still learning, I'm still practicing, I'm still growing and getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love all of that you said. And as you say, that thing about it is a practice, you know, because as we said earlier, so much in the world right now that means we've been practicing something else that's not so authentic and not so, you know, open, I guess. And actually to therefore be that does take practice. And I completely agree with you know, there is that little bit in the middle where, you know, if you know yourself well enough, you know what you need in that moment, which might be to just wallow, might be just have one of there's a great book called Pussy Reclaimed. I can't remember the author now, but she's a fantastic book. But she talks about having swamp days. So where if you're feeling that, you know, actually really lean into it, because again, we're often told we have to bounce out of it really quickly and we have to be okay. Sometimes just really wallowing in it is, you know, is what you need. But I love what you said there about, you know, it's knowing that there's that, and I think that's a lot of what the tools that you share in the book. It's, you know, in that moment, knowing that there's another moment, that there's hope in the next moment, that there's an optimism, there's a light, there's something that you know you can have access to be able to see that next step, which makes it okay to be where you are, to feel what you're feeling in that moment, to process it, which of course is so healthy for us to, like you say, if you're feeling something, you know, to feel it, to let it work its way through, because if we start repressing it, you know, we don't ever really deal with it. So
well, look at children. We allow children to be sad and we help them through it, hopefully. Hopefully that's what we do. We allow a lot of emotional expression when children are doing it as beautifully as they do. And then when we're adults, we tend to try and keep it in because it's not okay for some reason to express that. But one of the most beautiful things, I think, is when you have somebody or some people in your life that allows you to be whatever you are, feeling whatever you are, and accepts you and loves you and is there with you through it, doesn't judge you. That is the most amazing thing. I think the sad thing is when people can't handle other people's emotions. I don't think our emotions are ever the problem. I think that the problem is that other people can't handle them. And that's because we're not taught how to handle them. So to me, this is a lack of emotional intelligence. And that I talk about emotional intelligence in the book, which is completely different to intelligence as we know it. So being emotionally intelligent is about understanding what's going on for yourself, expressing it, managing it as well, but also being able to identify and accept and help somebody else manage it as well. So it's not about controlling somebody else's emotions or stonewalling somebody else's emotions or making somebody else feel bad for what they're feeling. I mean, how awful is that? But I think a lot of us just don't really know what to do with other people's emotions. But actually, all we really need to do is just say, yeah, I get it, or that's okay for now. That's okay.
Yeah. And of course, that emotional intelligence starts with ourselves, as you pointed to there. You know, if we are able to do that for ourselves and make it okay for what we're feeling, that's the first place to start, isn't it? Because so often, you know, you mentioned there about being your own best friend, walking through this, you know, often we are not our own best friend in this scenario. And again, it's a practice, you know, so a lot of the time, you know, I will end all my coaching sessions with, you know, be kind to yourself. You know, whatever's coming up's okay. You know, be kind, be compassionate to yourself, and be your own best friend. And it's so much easier to be other people's best friends when we're being our own as well, is my experience. So we're going to have to wrap up. I could literally talk to you all day.
I know.
And we'll have to organise another time when we can do that, when we can literally just talk all day. But tell us a little bit more, because I know you mentioned there, we talked earlier about you've got a sort of book launch coming up. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you. Well, we're in the planning stage at the moment, and I say we because somehow I have managed to collect a group of wonderful people that have just want to help me, which is amazing. So I first had this idea of a book launch because I wanted to just celebrate having written this. So I spent 12 months just writing. Then I spent the next 7 months doing the editing, formatting, typesetting, cover designing, proofreading and publishing with the help of some people, thank the Lord, because I could not have done that on my own. So I thought that was going to take about a month. Naively, it took me about 7. So I thought, yeah, I definitely need a party for this because it's quite a big chunk of my life that it's taken up, and now it's out there. I love this thing that is, hopefully, it's kind of, I feel a bit detached from it now, like it's not mine anymore, it's just got its own life. So I hope it's going to do its thing and be a really positive influence in the world. So I want to celebrate that. But I first thought, I just want to get some friends and family together and maybe go and sit in a park with giant Jenga and a slackline and a barbecue, and a few friends had asked whether I'd sign their copies for them, which is very sweet. So I thought, yeah, I'll do that. I'll have a little table and I'll just sit there and just be a bit, I don't know, a bit fun really. And I like being outdoors. I like having a bit of fun activity going on. And then I mentioned it to a few people, and I now somehow have a photographer, I have an event manager, I have a brand consultant. I've got all of this going on. I've got some sponsors and a venue, I think, but we're sorting that out the next couple of days. So by the beginning of next week, there'll be invites going out, and there are going to be drinks and all kinds of things, maybe even music. It's just bizarre that it's kind of become this bigger thing, but actually it's just a party and a get together and a chance for people to talk about happy things, and it'll be a really positive occasion, I hope. And I just want it to inspire people to go and do what they can for people and for themselves. That's the point of it.
Yeah, amazing. And for me, that just demonstrates something that I believe is when we show up in the world authentically, vulnerably, shining our light as you've done, we just attract these other people in who just, you know, will come in and make this party happen for you, and all these wonderful things. And, you know, coming back to enjoying the moment, you know, that, you know, that is just going to be such a wonderful celebration for you. And to be there in the midst of all these wonderful people who come together because they want to celebrate what you've achieved is just going to be incredible. And you know, hopefully an invite will be winging its way.
Hey, I would love you to see that. Well, you have been genuinely, Rebecca. I mean, your listeners will know this, but I have to just shout out to you and the amazing heart that you have, because every step of the way you have just been such an ambassador for this, and I am so grateful because we've never actually met in person, but you're such a beautiful soul, and everything that you post and everything that you say and do, I just think it's what the world needs. So keep doing what you're doing as well, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, darling. Thank you. And right back at you. And, you know, I take so much pleasure in championing championing people who are putting something out there in the world that I think is wonderful. So I will continue to do that. All the details for the book, where to buy it, and any other information about Vikki, where you can find her, where you can find out about the brilliant work that she does. If any of you are watching this and thinking we need some of this in our world, then you can reach out to Vikki. But from the very bottom of my heart, Vikki, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You beautiful, beautiful soul. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
You too, Rebecca. Thank you very much.
I am a woman, not here to please you. It's time to move on, 'cause my time